I do think that, I mean, my background in this industry is as an art director, not as an editor. So I'm always waving a flag for the visuals in all books. And I just feel that if you see, you have to go by what you feel, I think, first of all, make a choice. That's what makes one publisher different from another. When you see something you absolutely love, it's about finding something that matches and works with that.
For me, much of the reason for the success of a book from translation is where the story is very, very good, and the pictures too are very, very good, and the translation. I mean, I would just like to say a word for the importance of having a really good translation, because nothing kills a book quicker than a book that doesn't reach the hearts of the people who are reading it. And I suppose we choose most of our books we tend to choose from Japan and France. We have one of our favourites here, Albin Michel also, and we choose from Sweden, and for me those countries have a very warm approach to storytelling. It seems to me that in those countries that the child is sort of at the heart of the story. We avoid the really arty ones.
I mean, I would agree with Julia. I think it's all about having a great story and some really, really great pictures. I mean, to pick on maybe a slightly unfair example, you were talking about how many languages that the Gruffalo has sold into. And as far as I'm aware, that the Gruffalo is not a native inhabitant of any of those countries. Maybe, I haven't visited them all. But I mean, it's a great book with a really great story that is translatable across cultures, and I think that if we buy books like that, then I don't think that the culture is a major issue. I mean, I'm not saying that there are no cultural differences. I think there certainly are, going back to my comment about people telling us that Little Red Hood was not British because it was too stylish. I also remember one of the first things our translator said to the French author was that this book had really tickled the English sense of humour. And when I met up with the French publishers in Bologna, they said, you guys did a great job because of your very British sense of humour. So we had the French publishers telling us how British we'd made their book.
I think that's interesting. And I just wanted to add, I spoke to Barry Cunningham from Chicken House, and he made the point that I was quite interesting. For 10 plus, he thinks that now with the social networking, there's far fewer cultural differences, and that it's much easier to step across cultures now. But he did say that was 10 plus. He thinks it's still much more difficult with the younger fiction and the picture books. And I think I would agree with that.
I'm not convinced that we're less courageous to try ideas out. I think that often we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot, if you like, because my experience, I guess the only thing I can go by is that sometimes I'll talk to publishers about certain ideas, and we are good at shooting things down in flames from the beginning. What do you mean we don't do that here? And I think if you look at our background, our cultural background, it's very diverse. We know that Britain's a very diverse country, but there is a sense of we know what works, and we follow that until somebody does actually break them off. One or two books that I've done over my career, I think the books that I've enjoyed the most, which maybe have broken the mould a little bit, were against huge opposition.
Yes, I often get asked by journalists or anybody, will there be a sequel of the Gruffalo? And I always sort of jokingly say I would only do the death of the Gruffalo. So that would be the test for Julia and Macmillan, whether they would be willing to publish the book The Death of the Gruffalo.
I'll say something very briefly in answer to that. We don't publish a great deal for that age group. One of the most basic, and I know is an obvious comment, is that I'll say it about me, and perhaps more my age group than people younger than me. We are not good at learning a language and taking it forward in our lives. So because we can't read it, we can't buy it either. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. When you go to Bologna or to one of these book fairs anywhere in the world, just about every meeting I go to, everybody will speak English. And I'm afraid I'm down to a little bit of French and the odd German word. And I think I represent a lot of people. And maybe it's my age and my experience in publishing, but I do think that's an issue.
We publish books up to the age of 12. Fruit Loops and Dipsticks is a Swedish writer who we've translated just about all of we've translated a lot of Ulf's Stark, and that's because I read Swedish, and which is also what you are saying. But we have also then, I think it's all about trust, and we now have published some Dutch books, and that's because we now have a very good Dutch translator, very good relationships with those. There's a lot of trust for me in the people that we're meeting at Bologna and Frankfurt, and then you have to we take some leaps sometimes. It helps if you can read some samples, and also then if you know that the writer is very, very good, then often it should be possible to have that work in English as well, I think.
Yes, I've been told that nowadays the European publishers are providing more English translations from the outset.
I mean, I would just agree and say yes, absolutely, when you're dealing with fiction and not picture books, and I think it's totally down to trust. I mean, but we don't employ a translator just to switch the words over from, say, French to English. We employ a translator because our translator knows that market far better than we do, but she also understands that the style that this book is written in French, and she understands where and what pigeonhole it goes into on a French bookshelf, and that is vital when we translate it into English, so we know we know exactly where it's coming from in its own language, I think.
And I think that, and again, when I was speaking to Barry, he said that when they're buying in fiction, and I think they're buying in quite a bit at Chicken House, they do treat their sort of core text quite freely, and they edit quite freely from the original language, and they use their translators in quite a flexible way. So I think that's quite an interesting point. Now we've almost got to finish, and I think I just wanted to sort of wrap up by saying, I think we are all saying in this room that there is a greater need for diversity in terms of cross-cultural dialogue and healthy exposure to different styles of writing and illustration.